Hello. Thank you everyone for coming along. It's a bit of a graveyard shift, this one, or headliner, as I call it. And I guess today I'm going to be talking about audiovisual technology, but not through the lens of IT, but particularly, within the context of it becoming an IT problem, which has been happening for a long time. So, a bit of background about me. I actually started out in IT at Jigsaw, and then I moved more into the AV world because I was kind of more interested in that. So I was more interested in music, in audio production, and that kind of thing, and it felt like AV was a bit closer to that. And I ended up having my own integration company, so I was kind of out there on the road doing everything. So in integration, you do everything. You do the design, you do the kind of installation, you're on the tools, you're supporting it, you're kind of commissioning it, programming it. So you get a bit of a flavor of everything. And then when that business kind of went out in a blaze of glory, I got sucked back into the amorphous orange blob of Jigsaw. And they only waited about 6 years to ask me to speak at this event. So I'm very excited to be here today. And yeah, I suppose it's about what is AV in the contemporary workplace. How do you get it right? Not really about products, and more about the approach. What approach should you take to audiovisual? Because, it's sometimes a little bit of a poor relation, if you like. So why have I called it the elephant in the meeting room? Other than AI is extremely good at visual puns, so you better use it. I just thought there's kind of, it's conspicuous. It's something which is there in just about every business. So audiovisual technology, like IT, is in every business. And it's often enough a little bit of an afterthought. And this isn't about sort of saying how important it is and being precious about it. It's more that, I guess there are some sort of, there are some factors around AV, like the cost and the floor space and the visibility of it, that are slightly different to IT. So, if you build a big boardroom and you spend a lot of money, then what you're doing is putting a lot of money per square foot into one room. And if there's any problem with it, it's extremely visible. Or if it's underutilized, then you've kind of made a pretty grave error. So kind of understanding what you're doing before you start is really, really important. And what I'm going to do, which is something you don't do very much in the tech industry, or people don't do very often in the tech industry, I'm going to kind of touch on some of the negatives. So I'm going to touch on some of the things that go wrong, and some of the sort of tropes, the negative tropes around it, because I think that actually can be really productive, because the things that become ingrained in us to say, oh, this is bad because of this, or this is always like this, it's quite important to go and look at that and say, okay, well, actually, why do people think that? Is that the case? And try and sort of improve what you're doing around that kind of thing. So, AV has been around for a long time. This here, I chose this image because this, it sort of looks like an old meeting room, obviously, is one of the reasons why I chose it. And the other reason I chose it is because of these little guys. See the little guys? That's the AV guys. And these big guys, they're the ones who are having the meeting, and they can't get the AV to work. So they've had to ask the little guys to come in and help. And that's basically what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about sort of the stereotypical response to meeting rooms, which is they don't work. So our meeting rooms don't work. So in the course of me going around in my career, going to see businesses and talking to them about upgrading their AV, I've heard that so many times, people just basically hating the meeting room equipment. And another stereotype around it is sort of people saying, oh, it takes a lot of time. We waste time getting set up. So we start the meeting, we waste a whole load of time. Other things they'll say is it doesn't work with my Mac. So it's good and relevant for you guys. I'm sure you've heard that plenty. One that I get an awful lot around this is, if you're carrying a heavy screen, I've carried a lot of heavy screens in my time, the heavier the screen, the more likely you are to hear this. People will say, can we get the football on that? And if you're doing an AV install, you'll hear that probably 5 times a day, that joke which everybody thinks is they're saying for the first time. And I guess what I think is that these tropes are actually quite important, because they do teach us something about like what people are, how people view the industry or the technology. You know, one of the good ones is, I can work my telly at home. Why can't I work this? Heard that loads of times. And it's like a saying where you only know the beginning of it and you don't know the second half. Because you can work your telly at home because you've spent loads of time at home. Every single night you spend there, and you've figured out, you've really invested in finding out how to use it. But you're not in the AV. And so, you know, I'm not saying that that really solves that problem, but yeah, there's a reason why you can work your telly at home and not the AV in the meeting room. Because in the meeting room, you almost want it to fail. You just get that sense that people sometimes are kind of like, right, oh, it doesn't work. Get the guys in, get the little guys, get them in. So shifting the tropes is difficult, but it is actually, I think, starting to happen for various reasons, which we'll sort of come on to. Now, sort of continuing the theme, I feel like AV is kind of IT's weird cousin. But as I was saying, it's kind of an old industry, and I think actually possibly weird uncle is more appropriate. Because if you think about it, AV's been around a lot longer than IT, given that AV theatre, you know, it's part of that industry which is centuries old. So the kind of sense that like it's been around, but it's been adjacent to IT, and never really fully integrated, has been something that I would say has been the case for some time, and that has all changed. So it's massively changed with the advent of Teams. So, you know, you can pretty much just pin it to Teams. You could say, you know, Teams, Zoom, and a general move towards software platforms within the AV industry, but really the thing that has happened, I guess including COVID, if you add COVID in as well, is there's been a massive shift from AV being a kind of separate thing to being integrated into part of the conversation around IT. And obviously other elements of the industry are also moving towards IT. So network standards and kind of, you know, Dante, NDI, things that you used to do with a lot of hardware, you can now do over a network. And so AV people are having to learn about IT, IT people are having to learn about AV. We all kind of know that. But it's kind of making the elephant in the meeting room even more conspicuous. So people are kind of, it's a conversation you do need to be having. You know, what are we going to do about audiovisual going forward? And is it more than just more of the same? Do we need a shift in kind of our perspective? So my big, I guess my big question, my big elephant in the meeting room question is, why doesn't it work? That's not to say that no meeting rooms work. I believe me, I have actually deployed good AV that works, but there is, you know, that sort of question around why it doesn't work is the thing I'm trying to answer, or the thing around its reputation for not working. And traditionally, I think the reason was AV guys were building the user interface. So you know, there was a long time pre-iOS, you know, when the only touch panel you might interact with would be in a big boardroom. And newsflash, the guy who programmed that user interface and designed it is the same guy who installed it. You know, it's the same guy who wrote the code. It wasn't somebody who knew about intuitive control. Like, you know, give an iPad to a child and they just know how to use it, as we know. You know, so there was a whole period of time pre-iOS when touchscreens were being designed by AV people. And I think that gave the industry an extremely bad name because, you know, just because you can put a feature in, you can install a button for something, it doesn't necessarily mean you should. I guess then that sort of way of kind of almost doing too much design has kind of slightly gone away now, because obviously with Teams, you're not necessarily having to design the interface. Now, that's not always the case. There are still times where there's custom interfaces, and I think they're getting better. Not much better, really, but they are getting better. But now, you know, you have your Teams screen, you walk into a meeting room, and you should see a consistent interface each time you walk in. So UI maybe is getting solved a little bit. But now we have a new problem, which, you know, is more that the IT guys, not the AV guys, the IT guys are coming along and they aren't really respecting the laws of physics in every case. So there's a little bit more of kind of, look, this is easy. You get this box, you install it here, front of the room, job done, meeting room. And that's kind of, it's almost like we've gone from too much design to too little or lack of. And that's kind of not necessarily considering the thing holistically and understanding acoustics and the right product for the right space is starting to sort of erode into confidence over meeting rooms from a new angle. So that's a sort of a lot of negative stuff. Don't worry, we can talk some positive stuff. I think the question you need to ask, or one needs to ask, is what is AV actually for? So, you know, and within that context, what can it achieve? So this image here, this platform here is Google Beam, which looks really great. You know, it's kind of, the concept is it's a multi-camera system with a kind of live AI rendering going on, where you're trying to give the person using it the most natural, realistic sense that they are talking to the screen in front of them, to a person in front of them rather than the screen in front of them. So you're kind of developing a kind of, they're really leaning in to a goal of making you feel like you are in communication with someone who is actually in the room. And you know, they say that they do get much more intuitive turn-taking and things like that, so responding more naturally and that kind of thing. And that's great. I think that, like, you know, what they've done is they set out to create a system with a really clear goal. And they've gone and they've created it. And to an extent, it's kind of bespoke, but you know, that's a nice way to start and finish a project. I think the issue that we have more generally is that the aim always with audiovisual technology? Are you always trying to create a scenario where it feels like you are in the room with the people who are on the other end of the line? And I think that's probably the question to ask. I would say, given what the technology does now, what it might do in the future, you know, that could be an admirable goal, but at the moment, it's probably not really what it does best. And you could probably step away a little bit from trying to create these sort of photorealistic experiences and move a little bit more towards what can the thing do really, really well now for your organization. And for me, the thing that AV is doing amazingly at the moment, or meeting room technology and video conferencing technology, is it's doing that kind of quick turn around to chat to Jeff over here about something which he said the other week, but Jeff is in, you know, the US, you know, and it's kind of, it's creating that capability to communicate internally extremely quickly and well and effectively on an informal basis. So in a way which is kind of informal and friendly and kind of the equivalent of having an office full of people who you need access to for information and collaboration. So fundamentally, it's collaboration. Now, it's sort of an obvious thing that it does that well. But I think you do lose sometimes sight of that fact when you start to scale it up, when you start to look at meeting rooms and boardrooms and things like that. You don't necessarily remember what is the thing that this technology does really well. You start to think about, oh, what could we make the technology do? And maybe it can do it, maybe it's not quite there yet. So I think then, you know, the question, once you kind of accept the premise of like if you accept the premise of what it does well is this sort of quick, this fast, simple, smaller scale perhaps communication, you then have to say, you then might say, okay, well, what type of rooms should, rather than can, but what type of rooms should we build in today's workplace? And you step a little bit outside of the AV stuff and into the sort of human interaction side of things. And one of my biggest challenges in my work is boardrooms. And I've kind of asked AI to build a really long boardroom. You know, I just prompted it to build a really, really long boardroom. But I've been in boardrooms like this. I've been in businesses that have rooms like this. And the question you've got to ask, aside from the technology, because if you come to me and say, Anthony, can we turn this into a hybrid space? You know, the answer is yes. Obviously, I can give you like 20 cameras. We can have microphones everywhere. We can have speakers everywhere. We can have voice lift. We can do whatever you like. But the question I would be asking is there going to be any kind of natural human interaction in this space? Can you have a conversation in this space? Now, you might say, well, boardroom is not really about conversation. It's about certain type of decision making. And now that's fine, but I don't think that's the way people look at it. People look at it as the boardroom is the big room where we have lots of people in there. And that's just about as far as people actually think about it. What you actually have to think is, okay, but what is it for? What are we going to do in there? And it's more, in my view, like a sort of a conference space or a parliament type space where you might have effectively a formalized process of taking turns, talking one after another, not really conversing, but giving a view, and then sort of maybe doing voting and things like that. Now, if people were to say, okay, this is what it's for then, we're going to do that, you could make such a good system for that. You could make a really perfect system with individual microphones, with individual push button to talk. It's much more stilted because you're just acknowledging that if you create a space like that, it's going to be stilted because this person can't really talk to that person over there. So fundamentally, the space doesn't work if you try and treat it like a small space that's just got big. So, other things, I have this constant battle with multi-camera solutions in my work. So I don't know if you've ever had a big boardroom with multiple cameras. The desire is for it to follow the active speaker all the time, track the active speaker every single time, 100%. And I have to say, it's just not going to work. It's not going to be 100%. Not the AV companies who make these systems would agree with that, but it's true. It won't be 100%. I once had a customer who kept telling me he'd seen a system, and it was perfect. It was brilliant. It was tracking every single time. And I was like, well, tell me what it is. Go and find out. Go to the people, because he'd had this meeting with his company who'd done it. They finally got back to me and he said, yeah, they had 3 guys and they were controlling the cameras in the background. I was like, right, okay, yeah, that works. So basically, I just feel like, you kind of have to sort of set your expectation. Now, I'm not saying, it's not possible to do this stuff or won't be possible to do this stuff. I'm just saying we got to sort of look at what the functionality of the space is and whether or not, on a human level, you're going to be able to deliver what you think you're going to be able to deliver in there. So on the one hand, I think one of the things that's going to happen is that rooms are going to get a bit smaller. So although they should get smaller. Because it's not just for the tech. One outcome of that is that the tech then works really, really well, and it's really easy to deploy. But the other thing is that you actually have more spaces where people can do that quick, informal, have a conversation, 2 or 3 of us, maybe 1 of us, jump into a call. You need a private space to do it. Office spaces are kind of, it's been happening for a long time. It's not a new thing, but the kind of why is it happening is not necessarily looked at very often. Little small spaces and little private areas. I often see places, in our business actually at Jigsaw, I'll often see people just roaming around looking for somewhere to have a conversation privately, just on a phone, kind of trying to hide down in a corner. And it's just the spaces need to accommodate that. We've got a massive boardroom, and I'll often see 1 person in there having that call. So, the other aspect is looking at like when you make a space hybrid. So I think everyone's had that experience of being the only one dialed in to a hybrid meeting room and finding that it is quite awkward and it's quite difficult. Now, I think that experience differs depending on the type of room that you're joining. And it's not just about the size, it's also about the kind of formality of that occasion. So if you join remotely on your own, a room full of like this many people, it's going to be awkward. And it's not just because of the technology, it's also because that room is awkward. You can, if you join a smaller meeting, it just works and makes more sense from that hybrid perspective, even if you're the only one dialing in. So other types of spaces that I think you're going to find, other than smaller, more focused spaces, is there's still a big sort of area of multifunction spaces. So where you might divide this space into three, and you've got three smaller rooms, and you can open it up, and it becomes, let's say, a training space. It becomes an event space or something like that. I think that's great, and I think it's something that AV can do really, really well. What I often find is the other thing they want is for it to be a boardroom like this with a silly long table. So, if you can just get that bit out of it, then those multifunction spaces work really well. Another type of space are studio spaces, and this is slightly different. It's more of a thing that I am keen on, and some sort of organizations that I'm working with. So I'll come back to that, but studio spaces are kind of I guess a third space that you might consider, it's not quite a meeting room. So how do you then take that kind of design approach and scale it from kind of like one room or one little space and look at a whole office or multiple offices? Because, I've said a lot of stuff about what people want and what people need, but, that's not, I don't necessarily know, and it's not necessarily the same for each business. So the picture, in my view, starts to make a lot more sense when you're combining this type of approach with smart building tools. So what are smart building tools? On the one hand, you can really reduce them to basically just booking systems. So kind of book a meeting room, book a desk, book a little co-working area, book a locker. Because if we're doing hot desking properly, you don't leave your bag and all your crap on the desk. So, book a locker, book a car parking space. So on the one hand, that's kind of like a really boring, doesn't feel like that's going to really revolutionize the workplace. But on the other hand, what we're trying to do here is enable hybrid working properly and enable that office space that you've spent all your money on to be an asset that the people who work there can really use. Open it up, like democratize that space so that people know what bits of it they can have, what bits of it they can book, what bits of it they can be in. And at the same time as doing that, you're gathering tons of data. So you're finding out who is in there. You're establishing what areas are used most. You're establishing how many people use what space and when. And you're kind of starting to, if you can be clever about this and if you can be iterative about it, you're starting to sort of find out, okay, how is this space actually used? Because you've got to remember that an office space, as you scale up or as you kind of get more granular with it, is a lot of different things to different people. So it's I have a 10-week-old baby, which is just a fact. That's not to do with the talk, but I do have one. So, this talk is just between me. It's the thing that is between me and a bed for a full, unbroken night's sleep. So for me, perhaps the office would be an escape. It's somewhere I can go and get away from the house to actually concentrate on work. Then it can be, obviously, it's a meeting space, but is it a collaboration space, concentration? Is it productivity? Is it about promoting the business? Is it about testing products? Is it a lab? The office is lots of different things. And I think you've got to sort of recognize that and try to understand how you can kind of focus your space into the specialist areas that your business has, things like once you start getting data out of your building, you can start being really clever with it. You can start saying, okay, I booked a meeting for tomorrow. But I also am running in the background a test on my AV equipment at 4 a.m. and it comes up, oh, there's a problem with the audio. I'll therefore talk back to my booking system and say, actually, you need to use this room. I'll send data then to my tech people to come in and fix room air, and you can start getting smart, genuinely smart with these systems, and also offer more value to your employees, because at the end of the day, it's like employee retention, trying to make that if you start someone new, it's surprising, especially for certain types of people and for people who have, different kind of neurodiverse needs and things like that. It might not be that it's that easy to go into an office. An office might feel like quite a scary place. I work from home all the time, so even when I go into my office, I don't really know who anyone is, and I find it a little bit of a stressful experience. And kind of like these systems really help with that. So they kind of open, the word is democratizing, because they open up the space to the people who work there. And then they start voting with their feet, because they start moving and using it in a certain way. And that then gives you the data to say, okay, well, this is what we actually need to do. So you start to get a feel for how and sort of why AV technology is positioned, or where it's positioned in the modern workplace. And especially when you kind of couch that in what we can really easily achieve, depending on the budget, of course, but what we can actually achieve with the tech, it sort of becomes quite an effective strategy. Now all of that really is about communication or collaboration, and what we haven't really talked about is content, So there's a huge crossover, of course, between AV technology and media technology. And in the corporate world particularly, they're starting to bring those two together, a lot. So internal collaboration is really great, and it's something that you've got to get right, and that's kind of, guess what we've been talking about. But external collaboration, so collaborating with other businesses and with other organizations, that is what great businesses do. That's what really good organizations are able to do. They're able to kind of go outward and collaborate. And the only way to do that is to kind of fundamentally open up, what it is that you do outside of your four walls. So, obviously there's marketing and there's PR and there's comms, there's everything like that. But more and more, there is video. There is creating video content with these same tools that we're talking about, creating video content which you can then use to show the world what it is that you specialize in and what it is that your business is really capable of. So it's kind of, you want to get the thing that you do well and make it open source. Now, it might be with events, it might be with stuff like this, bringing people in, it might be with communicating things out. Either way, it kind of is a place where audiovisual technology is going to offer you some solutions to some of those problems. Hollywood tech filters down into the AV industry, and you see things like virtual production. So I'm seeing that all the time now. People trying to do virtual production within a corporate environment. So virtual production is where you have an LED volume, so an LED screen, and you kind of create a virtual backdrop. Now it's kind of, look, here's a bit of an example, and it's actually pretty basic. So this guy, you got someone doing a bit of a piece to camera thing here. Then it's kind of a big wow factor, big screen. Then they're sort of doing a little bit of a news. Now this is one organization, and they are really using it for all these different things. This isn't kind of promo stuff. They really do use it, and this is kind of in a studio. What is a more traditional looking production studio, but I am seeing this moving out of production studios and into boardrooms, into kind of a weird, it's not quite a boardroom, it's not quite a studio, it's a kind of, corporates are big on creating these innovative spaces, we all know that, and sometimes they're just useless waste of money. But in fact, I think there is legs to this, because as I've said, I don't think the boardroom quite does what people want it to do, and these spaces maybe come closer to doing something interesting in that area. Now, what is the future for the technology? Zuckerberg thought it was the metaverse, which shows it is hard to predict. So I'm not going to sort of say that I know what it is, but I do think that the big productivity change, which is going to come, is coming in the form of the large language models operating in a live environment. So at the moment, when you create a transcription, you're suddenly throwing AI into a live space. And that is not really happening in that many places. So if you think about kind of, actually synthesizing the data and the information as the meeting is happening, and what could you then do with that whilst the meeting is moving, that's something which I think is massive, and the data is that you're generating is also huge for those AI models. So I think that's something that's going to be a big kind of factor. The other part of that is that live translation, live transcription is a massive thing for breaking down barriers. So taking away problems for people with hearing issues, and just translating language, and kind of that's the data bit again, or the language, the sort of nuts and bolts of what's happening in a meeting are being kind of weaponized into kind of really useful tools, which we haven't really done before. You'd have a meeting, and a lot of the time, not much would happen off the back of that meeting. It's harder for that to happen now. And then I think that sort of sending messages out of businesses with things like virtual production, as I touched on, and maybe these studio boardrooms, I think that's something that's going to happen as time goes on as well. So I guess to close, that the value of the office, maybe this technology, it makes you think that it's kind of making offices less important. But I do think that actually creating that scarcity, of face-to-face meetings makes them more important. And it makes office spaces more significant when they are kind of used. And I think as that kind of trend continues, people maybe having smaller offices but more focused and more specialized office spaces, I think audiovisual technology, is going to increasingly be a big part of that, but it's also going to be a big thing that you jettison. You get rid of it when you really, really need to physically, make contact with other people, and it makes it more important rather than less. And I think that's probably where I would end. So hopefully I've sort of acknowledged a few of the elephants in the meeting room. Thank you very much. And I don't know if there are any questions or any suggestions for like elephants that I've missed, or anything that you guys want to bring up, really.
Thank you. So maybe one environment you didn't really talk about, lots of startups like to have all hands meetings, lots of remote participants.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on whether it's possible to create that feeling of all being together in one space when maybe your groups of 50 or maybe even just groups of 2 or 3?
Yeah, I think that with event spaces, it is still a difficult thing to do as a hybrid space. Hybrid events is still a relatively sort of early medium, and I would go back to the virtual production technology in terms of kind of how you can make that an interesting experience for the far end participant and for the people in the room. So I think you can do a lot with the virtual backdrop, with people in front of that backdrop, and kind of creating a really cool experience visually in the camera lens, which is getting sent to the far end, and then in the room, it also doesn't lose its shine there as well. It's still quite exciting. Now, not everyone's going to be able to do that, but it's kind of, I think there are ways you can kind of try and increase the interest for the far end, because as you say, I think at the moment, by its nature, it's never going to be, it's not a conversation. It is, I am talking out to the audience and the audience is listening. It's always going to be that, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So the all hands, I think, works quite well You can deliver it on a small scale with I've got plenty of sort of solutions around that. But like making it interesting from the far end, that is the bit that's tricky. And I think something like virtual production probably goes somewhere towards solving that. Anyone else? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much, guys. And yeah, I'm going to go to a hotel and sleep. It's going to be great.